everybody.
We're the co-presidents of our local league, and we have many friends and members and board members on right now, and all of us concerned with natural resources and the environment and climate change. And we are absolutely thrilled to invite back a dear friend of mine. I've known Ray and Lola Johnson almost my whole adult life. I met them in the Adirondack Mountain Club, and that was over 35 years ago. So I've always admired and looked up to Ray and Lola. And many of you may know, Ray has become really a climate science expert in our area. He's written over 150 articles, and we know from the Press Republican, they get published once a month in the climate science feature. And we really appreciate your many years of being a scientist in our area. And he's also teaches at SUNY Plattsburgh, and a wonderful father and grandfather of many now. And Ray, I'm going to turn it over to you, but before I do, I know he has a fabulous PowerPoint. And I'm going to spotlight him so that he can present his PowerPoint. But for all of us, it might be easier if you change your view when it comes time, if you have something called side by side. That allows you to be able, when he shares his screen, to see him and his PowerPoint. And if you move the bar over, you can actually make his picture smaller and his slide bigger, so you can see it. I know it's a little bit of technology, but it really, we practiced it yesterday and it worked.
And it worked, yes.
It did work. So I'm going to spotlight Ray, and so he'll be there for everyone. And if you want to go ahead and share your screen, Ray, and it should be we should be able to view side by side. That looks awesome. And then he's going to start his. Okay, and I don't. There you go. All right. So I'm going to mute myself. If people, Ray said he'd accept questions during his presentation, but what we thought we'd do is if you would please put it in the chat, and I will follow the chat and then break in when there's a pause and ask the question. So Ray, the stage is yours, and Helen and I will mute for now.
Very good. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Helen. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with the situation that we're facing in terms of climate and the primary cause of that. And so I'm going to be fairly brief on that aspect of it and on the actual mechanism for climate warming. So what I'd want to do is just move then into some of the other issues and some of the other aspects of climate science, and then the big disruption that's happening now. Those who may have watched the Super Bowl this weekend saw probably 7 or more ads for electric vehicles from different manufacturers, many of which have not even hit the road yet, but it just shows what's happening in terms of this transition, this big energy transition we're moving through. Okay, so here's the first slide. This is the 800-pound gorilla, and it's a cartoon, if you will, or a sketch with carbon in the middle and oxygen on each side. So this is carbon dioxide, and this is the primary greenhouse gas. And this is the molecule that, when we emit it to the atmosphere, absorbs some of the infrared energy that's normally lost to space and is returned to the surface of our planet. So it's really quite simple. And it's not a bad guy. It just happens to be one of its properties. It just does what it does. We do have a lot of data, and you may have seen this graph before, and it's about 800,000 years of measurements of carbon dioxide that have been obtained in various ice cores. And you can see over the various periods of time, it's been as low as maybe 180. The left-hand axis is in parts per million. So it's been as low as about 180 parts per million. And then in an ice age situation, and then the carbon dioxide levels will increase again and go up to maybe 250. And there's one point there where it hit actually 300 parts per million. So the carbon dioxide cycle has gone down, gone up, gone down, and up over the last 800,000 years. What's different is today, in 2020, we're higher than any measurement in the last 800,000 years. So we're in brand new territory. And the correlation between these levels of carbon dioxide and the ice age period that we're in now with temperature is very, very tight. So in this, on these two charts, we see both the Antarctic temperature and carbon dioxide levels, and they're pretty much in lockstep. When the CO2 levels go up, the temperature goes up. When the CO2 levels go down, temperature goes down. Both in Antarctica and the ice core sample there, as well as the global average from Greenland, other glaciers and ice formations, as well as Antarctica. Again, when the CO2 levels go up, temperature goes up. When the CO2 levels, temperatures go down. And that's what we're seeing today. Today, we're about, on a global average, about 2 degrees warmer than we've been in the recent past. Okay. As hunter-gatherers, we made a transition about 10,000 years ago to farming and more sedentary life, villages and towns and cities. And as you can see, the direct air measurements and indirect air measurements of carbon dioxide have been very constant over that period of time until now. And in the last couple of centuries, we are very different than where we've been for the last 10,000 years. And this is direct air measurements done by a University of California graduate student back in the 1950s, where he sampled air and found that the best place to measure it was at the Mauna Loa Observatory, where the air is well mixed as it crosses the Pacific Ocean. And so this is the longest running measurement of direct CO2 measurements in the atmosphere. And as you can see, we're climbing and it's not slowing down at all. So here is the global surface temperature. And again, as we mentioned earlier, in terms of the correlation between CO2 levels and temperature, you can see here that the global surface temperature has been increasing significantly over the last basically 80 years. And so this is the increase that we have seen. It's not the, it's the average, and it's not necessarily what's happening in the Arctic with a 5-degree temperature change or a reduction in temperature change, say in Florida. So it's an average temperature increase. However, globally, the last 10 years have been the 10 hottest years have been since 2013. And 2021 is somewhere in the middle, but the warmest year on record so far is 2016. So this is the record over the last 100+ years, and these 10 hottest years have all happened since 2013. And just get down to the granular situation in Albany, New York. This is from Climate Central. There's been a 5.6 degree temperature change. So this is what I mean by global average versus local temperature experience that can vary a lot. This is an interesting photo. This is taken in February 2021, and it shows a Russian tanker going through the polar route north of Siberia, and it's accompanied by an icebreaker. This is brand new. New in the sense that Arctic shipping usually stopped in November and began again in May. But this is what the Arctic looked like last winter in February. And so this is opening up a brand new avenue of commerce with implications still to be determined. One of the aspects that we're experiencing, and you may have heard some news in the last couple of days about projected sea level rise. This is what's happening now. And we're seeing about 3.5 millimeters of sea level rise per year. Now, it doesn't sound like much, but if you put 3 dimes on top of each other, that's about 3 millimeters. And that's happening every year. And so it's beginning to add up. Over the past century, the sea levels have risen almost a foot, and they're projected to rise another foot in the next 20 to 30 years. So I mentioned the 800-pound gorilla. And as you can see here, the carbon dioxide from fossil fuel is about 65%. And then there's another segment of from forestry and land use. So about 3/4 of the greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, with a contribution from methane, nitrous oxide, and some of the refrigerants, the fluorine gases as seen here. And there's 2 basic primary sources. One is transportation, the other is electricity generation. So it's kind of interesting this Sunday to see so many car companies extolling the virtue of electric vehicles. And if indeed this does take place and we can meet the electricity need by those electric vehicles, this will go a long way toward reducing the amount of CO2 we emit to the atmosphere. The other big one, obviously, is the electricity. And if we can get renewables to satisfy our thirst for electricity, this will be about 2/3 of the amount of greenhouse gases that we're currently emitting. So this is 2021, and it was a busy year from extreme climate or extreme weather situations. As you can see here, the West had a lot of wildfires. The Midwest had a lot of what's called derechos or straight wind formations and tornadoes. And then the tornadoes in the Southeast, and then the hurricanes along the coast of the United States. We were lucky in 2021, New England. We basically escaped any major billion-dollar disasters. But the total amount of money that these disasters cost our country, our economy, was about $145 billion. And so it's beginning to cost us in terms of not addressing the situation with the increased CO2 levels and the resulting extreme climate experiences that we're having. This is Hurricane Ida last August, and you can just see how big it is. It hit Louisiana, but it was the most expensive weather disaster of 2021, with over $70 billion of costs associated with that particular event. So there's a couple of things that concern, as we continue on with our emitting large amounts of greenhouse gases every year, there's concerns that are arising, and the melting of the permafrost is a big one. Permafrost contains large amounts of methane, which is a much more potent greenhouse gas that will be released to the air. And as this feedback of warming of the permafrost and releasing of the methane, it's going to be a cycle. It's going to be a tipping point. The other thing is there's recent data that show that the Gulf Stream coming across from Europe into the coastal part of the United States is beginning to slow down, caused mostly by melting ice and cold water being emitted in the North Atlantic. And this has the potential for some major changes. Both the water will pile up along the East Coast and cause a higher than average amount of water there, as well as bringing colder temperatures to Europe. Another situation that seems to be accelerating is the melting of the ice sheets in both Antarctica and Greenland. And as they melt, the meltwater goes to the base of the ice sheet and lubricates their slide into the ocean in a manner that could become unstoppable. And even if we went to zero carbon dioxide emissions, chances are very good that those ice sheets would continue to advance into the ocean. And then, of course, we have climate refugees and social justice issues in terms of the impact of the carbon dioxide emissions and the extreme climate events. So it gets complicated. But here we are in terms of per capita emissions. And if we look at this, we see we're tied with Saudi Arabia in terms of the number of tons per person that the US emits. So each one of us emits on average about 17 tons of carbon dioxide per year. And if we go down to the bottom there, we look at China. On a per capita basis, they're about 1/3 the emissions of the countries on the top of the list there, Canada, US, and Saudi Arabia. The issue with China, of course, is the size of their population. But in terms of the per capita, they are way down on the list. This photograph really fascinated me. This is one of the newer container ships that have been built in the last 2 or 3 years. This one holds 19,000 containers. And when you think about the fact that each container has goods that have been manufactured somewhere in Asia, and then they're transported to either the US or Europe, you have the emissions associated with not only with the manufacture, but with the transport. And once a big ship like this hits harbor and those individual containers are taken off, they're put on trucks, which then emit more emissions as they're brought to Albany, Plattsburgh, and everywhere in between, from Los Angeles to where the ships come in, or Netherlands. So this tremendous amount of international commerce is a big source of carbon dioxide emissions. I understand there's been a couple of newer ships that have been put together that will transport up to 22,000 containerized shipping units. Gus Speth is he was the originator of the NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council. And this is a comment that he made that I thought it would be appropriate to share, and that this materialism can be toxic and we're losing our connection to the natural world. However, there's a lot going on. There's lots of activism to change the direction that we're taking, and nonviolent protests and artist statements are a part of this activism. And I had the pleasure with Jackie Roy to attend this climate march in Montreal in September 2019. And it was just fascinating. If you look at the people here in the image, you'll see most of them are young. And they have a lot invested in the future, of course, and they are in many cases angry, and they're protesting and looking for change in a direction. And being in Canada, this Joan of Arc image has superimposed on it Greta Thunberg's face. And I thought it was very interesting to see this in the crowd. This is a drone. We could hear the drones above our head, but this is an image that I got from the web showing this is Avenue du Parc going through the park in central Montreal, and just gives you some idea of what that number of people looks like. It was an amazing experience, and this captures the crowd in part, and it was very peaceful, very interesting. The signs were fascinating, very creative in many cases, unprintable in others, but interesting. So in addition to Montreal, protests have been held in many places around the world. And this past fall was the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change meeting in Glasgow, Scotland. And there were protests in England, and I just wanted to share a couple of photos here. These people were protesting in London, and that image just to the right of the word arrested is an image for the group Extinction Rebellion. It's a group of activists who on a moment's notice can get to a place and protest what they see fits with their mission of trying to arrest the direction that we're in. And so she was arrested, and I think she's 68 years old. This woman is 67 years old. You can see St. Peter's Church in the background with the Thames River. And here's another woman in her late 50s who was also arrested in protesting the lack of action by the British government. And then we have an artist, Maya Lin. She's made many strong artist statements, and including the Storm King Mountain Sculpture Park. But this is a recent one that was last year in 2021 from about April and May through November. And it took place in a park in New York City. And it was fascinating because what she did was go to southern New Jersey, where saltwater intrusion into the low-lying land has killed large numbers of white Atlantic cedar trees. So she, with a forester, harvested about 40 or 45 of these cedar trees and planted them, if you will, in New York City. I think this is Bryant Park, around 32nd Street. And as a statement as to the impact of sea level rise on us. And you can walk around these, through these, and just get a feeling for the impact of rising sea levels caused by climate change on our environment. I have a woman, Ana Fernandez. She lives in the San Francisco area, and she read an article about how much the sea level is going to increase by about 2100. And so when she visited the Pacific Ocean, she really got inspired to make a statement, if you will. And so this is a group of people that support her efforts. And what she did was come up with these 6-foot tubes that she filled with seawater, just to give an idea as to what the ocean would look like in 2100 when it was 6 feet higher. And she lit them so that they had a kind of a ghostly appearance, but it was her way of taking this factoid, if you will, and converting it into a sculpture. Then in 2020, a climate clock was installed. This is in New York City in Union Square. They put this clock on the wall reflecting the 7 years, 103 days, 15 minutes, whatever it is, 10 seconds, to show that this is what the scientists had estimated in 2020, that we had that much more time to stop our emission of greenhouse gases before things really got out of control. And I haven't seen it myself, but it's fascinating to see that this building was willing to put this clock up, and it's available for every passerby that is in that area. I don't think this person needs any introduction to me. She was very active in the fall of 2021, trying to galvanize, motivate politicians, policymakers into doing more about arresting the emissions of greenhouse gases. She's really quite a phenomenon. I think she turned 18 this January. She started at 15, and she's been responsible for literally millions of young people marching around the world on every continent to protest government policies and to encourage governments to take the leadership on reducing emissions. There are some very aggressive, necessary, ambitious goals that the current administration has put out, and that is to try and reduce the emissions by half by 2030. And then there's a Cape Wind, or an installation of wind turbines off of Massachusetts. This was denied a permit in 2016 and was approved in 2021. And it's pretty good size. It's going to be almost the size of a nuclear power plant, 800 megawatts, and it's going to be complete next year, or I think it's 2 years. So that's progress. There's also an initiative to have what's called the 30-30, conserve 30% of America by 2030. We've got a long way to go. We're only at 12% now, with 25% of the waters protected. But there's a lot of voluntary efforts by states and private landowners with conservation easements and so forth. And so we'll see how that develops over the next few years. Supporting the manufacture and purchase of EVs. We may have heard that one of his Build Back Better initiatives was to install 500,000 EV charging stations. That may not happen, but I noticed that the Department of Transportation is starting to use some of the money that was approved in 2021 to install a large number. I don't know what the number will be, but it'll be in excess of 100,000 EV charging stations. And then modernizing the electrical grid, phase out coal burning plants, build out more renewables, and basically to stop building vehicles. ICE is internal combustion engines by 2035. So this is just a map showing some of the opportunities that exist along the East Coast. The only functioning one now is off of Rhode Island, #1 there. But some of the others near Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, that's one of the Cape Wind ones that's going up now, that's being built now. There's another small one off of Norfolk, Virginia, and the others are being permitted, and the necessary environmental reviews are being done to hopefully get them built and operating. But let's take a look at the global solar PV installations by country. Look who's #1, China, by far, 2 to 3 times the next closest country, which in this case is the US. So they know they have an emissions problem. They know they have an air quality problem, and they are trying very hard and investing a lot of money to try and change that situation. Now, this is global solar. Look at global wind. Same situation. More than twice the nearest country in terms of installation of renewables. So they are, again, very aware of what the issues are that they're facing as a country, and they're trying to really change the source of their energy. This is kind of an interesting chart because it shows the growth since 2010 of global solar photovoltaics. And if you look at that chart, you can see it's really starting to climb and climb at a very rapid rate. It's not asymptotic, but it's not linear. It is growing very rapidly. And this is a lot of gigawatts of potential power. It doesn't produce that 24 hours a day, but it does produce it maybe at the 50% of that capacity. And so it looks very promising that this will continue to rise sharply and that this investment in solar PV will really begin to make a difference in our emissions. And same with wind. In 2010, we had some. In 2020, we got a lot, and there's more coming. So both of these renewables should have a big impact on our ability to reduce our consumption of fossil fuels, hopefully. 2020, for the first time, coal was less than the amount of coal used to generate electricity was less than that for renewables for the first time. So the top curve there is coal, and they kind of all nucleate on the right-hand side there in 2020 with renewables, nuclear, and coal. But the renewables is the rising one, the coal is the dropping one, and nuclear is kind of constant. We haven't built any new nuclear plants in a number of years. So this is kind of a landmark, because in 2010, coal was king. And it's not so much king now, although right now with the issues we're having with sufficient energy and an economy that's really taking off, coal is beginning to rise again. But it's really has dropped significantly since 2010. So we have a major disruption that is happening right now. And one of them took place a little over a century ago, horses to automobiles. So let me just show you an image. Some of you may have seen this before because I find it a fascinating photograph. This is Easter Sunday in New York City on Fifth Avenue. And I was told that there is an automobile in this picture, but I could not find it. These are all horse-drawn carriages except for one, according to the New York City archives. Well, let's look at what New York City Fifth Avenue looked like 13 years later. No horse-drawn carriages, zero. So this was a major change when you think about it in terms of all the things you needed to bring about a transition like this. There was farms, there was need for grain, stalls, farriers, places for these horses to stay. I mean, there was a large infrastructure situation to support the horse transportation system that was in place in 1900. And then 13 years later, it was basically gone. So we're in a similar situation now. If things continue to go as predicted, and that our government continues to push electric vehicles, the ICE should stop being manufactured by 2035. There are lots of plans for electric-powered airplanes and school buses. Actually, Quebec has a big electric school bus manufacturing plant. Same with electric trucks, and basically the issue is to electrify everything. This is a concept by an Israeli company. They've removed the engines and put in two electric motors, and it will meet a large, it could meet a large amount of the traffic in Europe, for instance, where the mileage is reduced, where it's less than 400 miles. It goes at a decent clip. And it's just the start of many different airplanes that are being considered and built as prototypes at this time. And here's the electric school bus. Lion is a Quebec company, and they've sold hundreds of these buses in Quebec. Even with the power coming from the Hudson Bay project, they're still moving ahead with electric buses just for air quality and protect their children from inhaling a lot of diesel particles, diesel fuel particles. This is a concept truck. It has not been made yet. The cab has been made and it has been on some test drives. This is by Tesla, and it's intended to have a long haul electric motor in the truck, and it would go 400 miles from, say, Los Angeles to the, say, Nevada or some places, points east, Arizona, New Mexico, drop off its a cargo, and then be recharged and go back. So it would be a perfect vehicle for transporting those thousands and thousands of shipping containers that we saw earlier. Battery powered chainsaw. And then what's happening now is the fact that EVs have penetrated the European market a lot. So the PEV is a plug-in electric vehicle, whether it's a battery, a BEV, or a plug-in hybrid, like we see below that. But the fact is that in the UK, 21% of the new auto registrations were plug-in electric vehicles. And if we look at Germany, Germany was at 30.4% plug-in electric vehicles. And if we look at Sweden, it was 53.9%. And Norway takes the prize. They're up at 85%. And I saw recent numbers for January, though not in chart form like this, that they're up to 90% of the total auto registrations at this point in time. So government policies can have a big, big difference in terms of making this transition happen, and happen fairly quickly. Unfortunately, we need basically a pandemic every year to get emissions down so we don't exceed the 2 degrees centigrade. Doesn't have to be a pandemic, it could be government policies, but that's the reduction in CO2 emissions in 2020 would have to happen every year. There's an organization called RARE, and Lola and I went to a conference at the National Geographic in March of 2019. And RARE and beehive.org made some very interesting presentations on there are solutions today. And one of the projects was called Drawdown. And this is a busy slide, and it's the last one I have. And it just shows that there are a lot of potential solutions that exist right now. In the lower right, there's two of them that I think are very important. And one is educating girls, and then family planning, along with solar farms and electric vehicles and wind turbines and so forth. So there's a lot that can be done. And whether it's managing grazing land or geothermal, you name it, there's about 80 solutions. And if you go online to Drawdown, Project Drawdown, you can get more details on any of these. And finally, I'd like to thank various organizations that contributed to this data set. And there are more. And I want to thank you for your time and your attention. Thank you.
All right. Ray, if you could stop sharing your screen.
Okay.
All right. And then we could all go back to gallery view. Yay. And would love to, again, I can't thank you enough for that tremendous presentation. And I found it extremely hopeful. I am much more encouraged after seeing it and hearing from you.